Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll just give it a few more minutes when people are still trickling in. Just want to say thank you very much to BookNet Canada for hosting this talk today. All right. My name is EJ Hurst. I'm the sales manager for New Society Publishers, and I'm the sustainability lead. I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Sunamith First Nations on Gabriel Island in British Columbia. I'm here with Jen Knoch and Julie Raddysh. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves? Sure, Jen.
Sorry. I'm Julie Raddysh, and I'm the publisher here at New Society Publishers. I'm with EJ Hurst, and part of my tasks in my job description is to calculate our carbon. So that's why I'm here, and I'm hugely supportive of this collaboration between ECW and New Society Publishers, and very excited about this new tool.
And I'm Jen Knoch. I'm here in Toronto. I work at ECW Press. I'm an editor there. I'm also the self-appointed sustainability officer, which gives me phenomenal cosmic powers to do things such as exciting partnerships with New Society. And we're so thrilled you came today and that you're interested in learning more about our tool.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Jen. So, welcome to the training session on how to use the sustainable publishing tools. Thank you again to BookNet Canada for hosting us today and for hosting the carbon calculator tools on their website. So the link to download the tools and the guidebooks is in the chat. We ask that only one person from each publishing house to download the tool, and it must be a Canadian publishing house. For people from outside Canada who are on this call, please contact us. I'll give you an email, sustainability@ecwpress.com. If you're interested in using these tools outside of Canada. So it's looking like the responsibility for action on climate change is falling more and more on business and industry, not so much being led by government these days. So by demonstrating that actions can be taken to reduce carbon emissions, we can inspire other people to act, and we can take some real concrete action on reducing climate change, which is a wonderful feeling. So today, Julie is going to walk you through the two tools, the book carbon footprint calculator, which gives us a cradle to warehouse carbon emissions of one printed book, and a publisher's carbon footprint calculator, which will give you an organizational carbon footprint of entire publishing house operations. So each tool can be used independently, although you get the most accurate results if you use them together, and Julie will be demonstrating how you can do that. As I said, they may be downloaded for free for one person per Canadian publishing house. And again, if you're outside Canada, please contact us and we can let you know what's possible. The sustainable publishing tools emerged from a collaboration between New Society Publishers and ECW Press. They were designed by Ian Lipton of the Carbon Accounting Company in Toronto, and the entire project, well, most of the project was funded by the Canada Council for the Arts through the Digital Greenhouse Grant. And a French translation of the tool is coming soon, and that is courtesy of the BTLF. So just before we launch into this demonstration, I wanted to start with an explanation of why should we measure carbon. So I'm just going to share a graph with you, which is a graph of New Society Publishers' emissions over the past 16 years, I believe. So one moment here, and I'll share my screen. So there you go. This is our carbon emissions year over year from 2008, when we first started measuring our carbon emissions. So we've seen a 58.84% reduction in carbon emissions since we began measuring. So these are emissions by all types of use. The large blue bar is our printing paper. Everything else, in the tiny lines on the right, is everything else. So you can see that paper is by far our largest source of carbon emissions. And just to make it easier for you to see what else goes on, This is a graph where we removed printing paper, and then you can see that the next largest emissions come from journeys of shipping. And then finally, the third was flights. So before we actually start the walkthrough, a couple of things we want to point out. We're still learning how to use the tools ourselves. These are new to us, and you'll see from Julie's presentation that she has done a lot of work with them, and yet we're still finding some places that we need to fine tune. Measuring carbon emissions is an inexact science. We've followed industry standards of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and set emission standards, and we've tried to make the tool as exact as possible, but you will see there are some measurements that are not included. If something is considered de minimis, it simply means the amount of carbon released is too small to have any meaningful impact on the final numbers, and so it wasn't included. We're also currently using generic paper emission for the first version of the tool. We're hoping to replace these with actual paper brands in the next version, and Sistana Paper has already agreed to add their papers to the tool, which will hopefully happen in this year. The book Carbon Calculator gives you carbon emissions. It doesn't look at broader sustainability issues such as deforestation or biodiversity, water use, other things that you might like to consider in your sustainability decision toolkit. So for example, we've included a link in the guidebooks to the design guide for the publishing industry from the Book Chain Project, and that gives more information on these sorts of consultations. So these tools are something in your tool belts, and they give you a great place to start making decisions. The other point I'd like to make is that it's not necessary to have every single piece of data. You just won't get as accurate a result, but you will still get useful information. The tool will still work if you don't fill in every single cell. And finally, the tools lose functionality if they're uploaded and used in Google Sheets. So it's really important that you use them in Excel only. So Julie will walk through the carbon footprint calculator first. And please put any questions you have into the Q&A as they come up. We'll answer any questions related to the tool as we go along, and then save broader questions for the end if we have more time. And Jen or Julie, anything you'd like to add?
No, ready to go?
Yes, thank you, Julie.
Okay, great. Since paper is our biggest concern as a publisher, this is a great place to start. Let's look at the book calculator for carbon emissions of one book. So when you fill out this calculator, it's really straightforward. You can all see everything's good, guys? Okay. All the calculations are built into it, so we're really just transferring most of the information that we find on our spec sheet into the calculator. So you begin by entering your book title, the ISBN, the number of pages that this book is, and this book is that we're working on here is 264 pages. The type of book this will be is a paperback. So I'll select paperback from the drop-down. The spread width, oh, darn, I'm using the wrong one.
No, you're using the right one, Julie. It's still there. So
okay, right. Okay, yeah, right. The spread width
yeah.
is that one. Okay, the spread width is what we think of when we open the book and we're measuring across both pages. So this is a 6x9 book. So our spread width will be 12 inches. And over here, if you're not working in inches, you can choose centimeters, but we're working in inches. Our spread length is 9. Add that in. Our paper that we're using, I've asked my production manager, and it's also on our spec sheet, is 57 pounds. So you can find most of this information on your spec sheet, or you ask your production manager. They know all this, usually off the top of their heads. This book, I'm going to do the cover width now. So when we think about the cover, of course, it wraps all the way around the book. So we have to include the spine. So it will be the two widths, the 12 centimeters. And in this case, the spine is 0.61. So that's our cover width. And the next is our length. That stays at 9 for the cover. And our cover weight of the paper that we're using for this book is 100 pounds. This particular book, the next question, you'll see that in the green fields, information is calculating for you. You don't need to worry about that yet. It's all part of the pieces that go together at the end. So just continue on to the next white field, and it's asking me if this is a print-on-demand book. In this case, no, it's not. It will have a print run of 5,000 copies at a traditional offset printing. So once we've entered all those book parameters, we can see at the bottom there, it gives us the total weight of each book for this print run. All right, good to move on to the next section. Great. In here, we're going to put some of our own office operation information, including the country that we're in. So for us, Canada. And in the city field, our office is on Gabriola Island. The calculator can't manage small cities very well, so I add the closest city center, which is Nanaimo. If you try and put a small city in there, all it does is say, I can't manage that, and try your largest city center close to you. And then your province. For us, that's British Columbia. The next section asks us, how many units did we print last year? Because I did this carbon calculator, our last audit was for the year of 2023, and I know those numbers because I did it in my carbon calculation. I'm going to use those numbers. And so the numbers I have for units for 2023 are 100,894, and that data is from 2023. Again, your production person will probably have this answer for you or can figure it out fairly quickly. The next question asks me if I know my scope 1 or 2 emissions. I do, because I've done our calculation the previous year. If you don't, you can answer no or you can answer yes. If you answer no, the calculator gives you the opportunity to do a quick and easy carbon calculation right here. You would follow through and answer these questions or skip it all together. This is not, nothing stops the process of working to the bottom. So in our case, it's yes. And I know that our carbon from our previous year for scope 1 and 2 is a grand total of 0.14 emissions. And that year again is 2023. I haven't done this year yet, pretty soon. Anything before we move on from in-house? Okay, going down to content creation. This part is pretty straightforward. What type of book is this? Well, this book is actually a nonfiction general audience book. And the illustrations in this book are either probably close to none, but let's put minor. So there might be a little something in there. And then we're going to make some selections in this next section about whether or not the individuals that did these tasks were either in-house or outsourced. So in this case, this is an outsourced author. And the editor was outsourced. Our illustrator was outsourced. Our designer, in our case, is in-house. Our typesetter, outsourced. Our production manager is in-house. Our copy editor is outsourced. And our rights manager is in-house. So pretty straightforward. Going down to the next section, in paper production, we're going to select the paper that we're using. So for this section, we actually select generic manual entry. And we're going to select the paper category. So this book is printed on 100% post-consumer recycled paper. So I'm going to take this all the way down here. There's lots you can choose from in there, or you can simply say it's not listed if you don't find one that works for you. The paper supplier, our paper comes from Canada, thankfully. And our paper supplier city, it might be in here. Let's see, we know our supplier is in Saint Jerome, Quebec. So let's see if it's all the way down here.
You can try typing it in, Julie, and it might.
There we go.
There we go.
And it's, I was concerned it was too small, but it's there. Now we're going to select our cover stock, which is generic. Again, manual entry. And for this selection, we just select not listed at this time. All the options for cover stock aren't listed. That's fine. We can select it as is. Okay, moving along to printing. We'll select our
Julie, I
yeah,
just wanted to jump in and say, can you scroll back up to the top?
you
In
bet.
that drop-down menu where it currently says generic paper options, manual entry only, the very first one, top of that. What we're hoping when we have that drop-down, we're hoping that you may be able to select specific brands. And so, for example, when the Sistana brands are in there, you'll be able to select your company, Sistana, and then another drop-down would show you all of their paper brands, just to give an idea of what our goal for the future is.
And going down to printer, we'll select our printer. Again, manual entry printer. Printer category. This is a offset printing that we're doing here. And the country again is Canada for this book. And the city, this book is printed at Friesen, so I would try and type in Altona and I'll show you what it does. It says, no, please don't do that. And I'll try Winnipeg then. And it's happy with that. So the next thing we do is select our ink. You can ask your printers about the type of ink. So far, the calculator makes it easy for us. This is our option. And the glue, this is our option. And the coating, this is our option. So I think that is generally speaking what we would select anyhow, but for now, that's what we have to select, and it's easy, straightforward. And then the last question here with printing is the percent of paper waste and scrap due to the trimming of the books. And I did check with our printer, and also in the guidelines, the values were the same, and they suggest using 30%. So if you can check, or you can go with the amount that's suggested.
I'm just gonna pop in to say, because we didn't really mention it, that the tools do have PDF guidebooks that come with them. So that's what Julie's talking about. So if you don't worry too much, if you feel like you're missing stuff right now, we do walk you through the process in guidebook form as well. And those resources are always available.
Thanks, Jen. Next, we move on to transportation from the paper supplier to the printer. So how is our paper getting from St. Jerome to Winnipeg? There's options here. And when we checked with our printer, it turned out, well, 80% of that paper gets moved around by rail. So we're going to select rail there. And the next we're going to look at is the transportation from the printer to our warehouses. So when the book is done, broadly speaking, we send most of our books to two main warehouses, our US warehouse and our Canadian warehouse. So we will put in our first warehouse, which is in Canada, and it's in Toronto. And we truck that shipment, that pallet of books or pallets of books, and I'm going to send about 50% of this print run to Toronto. The next warehouse we have is with Ingram in the US. And that's in Jackson, we also truck it. And that's the other 50% of this print run. These values need to reach 100% or the chart's not happy. So if you have different ones, just make sure, broadly speaking, you're making sure it adds up to 100. And now down to end of use. We're going to make some projections here, maybe be a little hopeful. With this book, I'm going to anticipate that we're going to have about 20% of this run unsold. I think that's reasonable after reviewing our excess stock. And a return rate, I'm going to be really optimistic about this, and I'm going to say it's 10% only. Should be great. So of those 20% of unsold books, what will happen with those? So if it's the 20% of excess stock, well, probably I'm going to recycle 99% of that. And I'm really going to hope to donate about 1%. So that's my 100%. That's how I've managed my 100% of the 20% of unsold. And over here in return, well, I'm going to say that 90% of those return copies are recycled. It might be higher. And I'm going to be really hopeful that we can get 10% back on bookshelves. Now, this is the bottom of this sheet, this workbook, and this is where all the fun happens. So you've inputted all that information. This is the magic time. So in here, this has broken out for you each aspect of the production of this one book, and it is telling you how much carbon was emitted for each part of that production process. And at the very bottom here, we have the carbon emitted per book. So not per print run, this is per book. And that's one carbon book calculator. Do we have any questions before we leave this sheet? I'll just say that what we do now, the first time we used this, I did a carbon book calculator for all the books we had off press. And now it's part of our production assistant's job to run one. It's part of doing the printing instructions, and then she does this as well, files it for me, and it's sitting in a file ready to go when it's time to do our company carbon calculations. Another way you could go about this, if you always print 6x9 books and they're always pretty much the same, is you put books for 2023 in here, and then you can add what that looks like so far, all the same, and then multiply it by your print run down here. You printed 100,000 of those books to keep it super simple. We do different formats. I like to see how different formats affect the bottom line of the carbon.
I'll also just note about Julie's process is that you can also save templates of this so that for all of your 6x9 books, that are usually printed on a certain stock or they're usually printed at a certain place, you can say like, this is my 6x9 template. And then you adjust the page number, you adjust like maybe your distribution details, but that way it's not like you're re-entering all of the information every time. You can just do save as and make a new thing. The other way we see this as being tremendously useful is just for the purposes of decision making. So New Society is very good. They put every book in there. But what if you were trying to decide if it is better to do digital offset in London, England, or to do offset here and to ship on a boat? You can create those A/B scenarios in this tool by using your save as function. So if you're just getting your feet wet with carbon calculation, what we want this to be is a tool that allows you to see the impacts of your choices. And I mean, really what we see here by looking at the final carbon footprint is like they're almost entirely all about paper. And so also just again to reaffirm, like if you don't want to put that end of use in, if you don't want to put your in-house operations in, it doesn't really matter that much if you don't want to take the time to do that. So just to say, you can use this to get exact numbers for each book, which is great, especially if you're interested in doing offsets, or if you're doing some kind of reporting for a B Corp certification or the like. But if you just want to play around and see, let's see what 5x8 looks like versus 6x9 if the book is slightly longer, or this kind of thing, this tool should allow you to do that. And just before we move on to the calculator for the whole enterprise, the organizational calculator tool, just to call out a couple of questions in the chat that EJ has answered there. Short run digital is print on demand effectively. That's how it's filed under this. And yes, in-house is in office. There is a section for remote work to allow for remote work in the next slide, but like also keeping in mind content creation there was only 4% of our footprint. It was pretty small. So even if it's slightly off because of working from home, that's okay.
All right, if we're ready to move on from this workbook, I'll stop sharing now and move ahead with the company carbon calculator. Are we good to go from here? Wonderful. So the next workbook might be a little intimidating, but really, again, like the last workbook, everything is built into here. You're going to have to source some information for sure. And to make it more accurate, you'll have to source more information, or you'll put in what you know and get a great idea out at the end. So don't be too overwhelmed. Take some time and review the instructions in the beginning, and there's links to each tab along the bottom. There's a lot of good stuff in here, and the supporting documents, the guides are great. So just follow along, go slow. You can read about the tool here, about how things are referenced. And then the next tab is where we begin. So far, this is actually our carbon calculator from 2023. So you'll see all our secret numbers in here, which aren't secret. And it's pretty straightforward. You add in your information, you know all of this, your office, your country, your city. And again, Gabriel Island doesn't work, so I put in Nanaimo and the province. That's all. If you have multiple offices, you can add them. We move on to scope 2. Scope 2 is stationary combustion. We don't have any of this carbon emission, so I just go past it. If you do, you would add it in here. The green columns over here will populate on their own. You add your information in the white. Another scope 1 is mobile combustion. And again, we don't use this kind of energy, so nothing for us in here. As well as this next tab. So far, our carbon calculator looks like it's pretty easy. We don't have anything to add in here. You might, again, remember these green columns populate on their own. You're just adding in your information. So moving along to scope 2, this is where we actually have a little bit. We buy our hydro from BC Hydro. I know our kilowatt hours that we purchase every year because our accounts payable person keeps a nice spreadsheet, and every time an invoice comes in, she marks not only how much it was, but how many kilowatt hours it was. So at the end of the year, say, hey, Cynthia, what's our kilowatt hours? And she sends that to me. Are we under a power contract agreement? No, we are not. So you can select here, no. And again, the rest of this populates all the way over. So moving along. Heating and cooling, that's all included in our electricity purchase, so I don't need to worry about that. The next spreadsheet, scope 3, book production. This is where things get exciting. This is where all the paper is counted. This is where all our carbon happens. So this is in 2023 right here. this is the results from the book calculator like we just did. So on the book calculator, remember at the bottom, it broke out those different production processes. It broke out the carbon use in there. So this sheet wants to know, with paper production, what were the emissions for the paper production of our one book? So I take that number over in the carbon sheet and I multiply it in the cell. You can do this on paper if you want, but I put it in the cell. I multiply that number by the print run. And then it gives me the amount of paper production, the amount of emissions from paper production for the entire print run. And again, I do the emissions from printing for the entire print run. It's the other line. There's one of those big lines at the bottom of the book calculator, and I multiply it by the print run. I do it for all of them. I do it for reprints and I do it for our print on demand. What I'll do is I will do one sheet and ask LSI or Rapido, how many books did we print in the year? And do one sheet and run that through. That's a little fussy and time consuming. So if you don't even address those, you can see that these are the little titles down here, the little amounts, those are our print on demand, or, you know, small runs. The big ones are all up here. And again, this is where the carbon emissions happen. So if you can get those in there, great.
Julie, can you show just the top of this page?
Yeah.
So that bit that Julie mentioned about bringing the numbers over from the book carbon calculator, it's actually spelled out for you here in 3 steps, even to the point of saying the number from this cell. It's kind of like your tax returns. Take the number from line, 14 D29 and put it in here. So, and it's also covered in the guidebook. So this is how the 2 tools work together.
I also will jump in to say, if you are not using the book calculator for some reason, I don't know, it's great, why wouldn't you? But if you weren't, and you knew the emissions that your paper could generate it, if you've talked to the printer and they've given you the carbon intensity of your paper, you could put that in here. You can also, like Julie has been our A+ student, our Hermione Granger here, and she's gone above and beyond. But if you just wanted to kind of generalize kinds of books, like, okay, we printed this many books that are about 400, like if you did it generally in your book calculator, okay, we did about this many 6x9 books that are on average 350 pages long, you could put that in here too. So it's up to you. So this is how it is used, like if you want to account for everything, as New Society has done. But if you just want to play around with some like estimations, you can also do that. There's nothing stopping you. And yes, and you can bring your own emissions factor on the paper if you've got it.
Julie, are you still there, or you look a little frozen? That would be sad. So it does look like Julie's having a technical glitch. Well, hang on. There she is. She'll be back in a minute. Any questions while we're waiting?
While we wait, let's take this time to talk about version. So there will be a handful of people here who have downloaded the tools already. Great, thank you. We love you. We love an early adopter. One thing to note is we did make a small change because, as EJ said, we were always discovering, even though we beta tested, you still discover new things along the way. So we'll actually have a just like slightly updated model for you very soon. So you may want to hold off for that. Or if you have one already, the difference is instead of page numbers, you'll see number of spreads in your book calculator. And that's a number that actually you just need to divide by 4. So you would get a higher number than it is. Anyway, we fixed this glitch. We will explain it in the guidebooks. All will be well. But just to say, if you have questions about that, or you're like ready to dive in right away, feel free to email me at sustainability@ecwpress.com, and I can tell you exactly how to navigate with the tools you have right now. We've actually already had the fix made. It's just takes a little while for things to be fulfilled. In in terms of some other questions, in terms of heat and power being included in your office rental agreement, yeah, I mean, you could contact your landlord and find out, or you could leave it out. You know, it depends how exact you want to be. When you're a tenant, obviously you have less control over some of these factors anyway. So I'd say that that's up to you. There are some discussions of tenancy in the guidebook specifically for the organizational calculator. As to the question about POD, really that's just to say digital, which I guess, again, we could have named it differently. It's talking about digital printing as opposed to offset printing. So it could be as high as your digital run is. We'll rename it.
I don't know what happened there, guys. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Back to
Welcome back. We've been
Yeah.
answering questions.
Oh, great, perfect. Seems like my internet just disappeared for a second, so that's too bad. We can move on from this page then. Okay. Going on to the next scope 3 in our spreadsheet, we are concerned about moving the books around from warehouse to warehouse. So what we've done here is I've recorded all our stock transfers and shipments from printer to distributors. So there are journeys. You can use calculators or tools online to determine how far it is from one place to another by which mode of transportation. You put this information in and it calculates for you the emissions. And in some cases, we had books that went, particularly with our from our distributor in the US, to international ports. And so what I measured in those cases, for example, let's see, this one to India. I've used the shipment went from Jackson to Elizabeth, which is a port for exporting. I measure that, and that went by truck. And then the shipment went from there to the importing port in India, and then we stopped measuring at that point. That's as far as we can go. And that was by watercraft. You can see the 2 shipments there, and it can calculate out pretty close the entire journey. Okay. Next, scope 3 is business travel, transportation accommodations, and probably it's safe to say most of us Canadian publishers are tracking our travels for free map anyhow. So finding this information was fairly straightforward. This in 2023, we didn't do a lot of travel. There may have been a few trips from Gabriola to Vancouver by ferry that aren't listed here. Again, that's such a small amount of carbon. I'm not super concerned about it. But our big airline flights, we didn't go to Frankfurt this year. That would normally be listed here, but pretty straightforward. The next
I just want to add that you could use this for author touring if you wanted to find out what the carbon footprint was of certain tours. You can get as granular as you want to. The biggest impact is going to be your flights. So if you do nothing else, just put your flights in there and you will capture a large portion of your transportation footprint.
Great. Next, scope 3. This is talking about your employees commuting to and from work. We have a sort of hybrid work from home office situation going on right now. People come and go to the office on their own schedules. This is a little too hard at this point for us to keep track of, so we don't. You could, if it's clearer for you, you could have your employees give you almost like a mileage chart, and then you would be able to do that too. The next is about working from home. And this is such a great little calculator. This was a difficult piece to work into our old calculator. So I was really happy to see that this was added into this calculator. So we have the equivalent, or in 2023, we had the equivalent of 11 full-time employees. And throughout the year, the number of hours they worked, the number of weeks in a year, taking off the number of holidays and office closure time, each person worked this many hours. The green populates for me and gives me a grand total of a amount of carbon that we can apply to our work from home offices. Moving along. Host computer servers. This was one that I went to our IT guy and asked, and without any hesitation, gave me this amount to add in here. And as an emission factor, I would suggest you use up here, they suggest a factor to use of 1.8 kgs of CO2 per gigabyte. So I took that suggested amount and it calculated it for me. Office waste is next. So we recycle aluminum cans. You can choose from a drop down here of all sorts of different types of waste, depending on what you're throwing out. So in this case, I did some aluminum cans. Again, we're not in our office much, so our office isn't actually producing a ton of waste at the moment. We recycle those, options of what you would do with it as well. And the amount that we recycle was actually under 1 metric ton. You can see up here, it was 0.15. So it'll register, it's rounding to 0 in this case, but it does still give me a little emissions over here. Next, we did some mixed. That went to the landfill, and I estimated 1 metric ton for the whole year. For this one, I wanted to include our excess stock recycling. That's quite a bit of paper that we recycle in all the warehouses. So the only option under the drop down for me was textbooks. Well, I didn't want to get into, well, is that a hardcover or paperback? Doesn't matter. Choose textbooks. If you really feel maybe your books are more phone bookish, you could choose that, but I chose textbooks. Those were recycled, and I was able to find out average weight, how many books we recycled that year, and that gave me 14 tons. And that calculated for me right there into the amount of carbon emitted. And moving on to the last page, which is really the best part. When you get to here, you click on your summary and up pops your whole carbon summary for your company. So when back in the book calculator, I said, well, I do know our carbon 1 and 2. Here's our carbon 2 right here that I inputted. And here's what our scope 3s are for what I'm tracking, and our total emissions at the bottom. And then you can buy your insets or your offsets, or you can set goals at this point to reduce your scope 3s, specific scope 3s. Maybe you want to tackle paper, and now you have a number you can gauge. And there you have it.
Thank you, Julie.
No problem.
Excellent. A+. A+ work. We all just still want a gold star. Maybe I'm just extrapolating from myself, or generalizing for myself. We do have a few questions in the Q&A. So the first question I can answer is from Abigail about whether the emissions factors assumptions would apply in various territories, e.g. Europe, UK. Yes, the tool is made to be a global tool. So the emissions factors for the UK would be drawing on UK emissions factors as opposed to, say, those in Ontario or BC or Washington or wherever you may be. So you can see that global cities are present there, and emissions factors where available for those global cities are included. The next question, is there a resource to see where different paper stock comes from? It's been hard to source 100% recycled paper and cover stock. We don't have that as part of our tools, in terms of like listing where stocks come from. When we do extend it to include specific stocks in our 2.0 version we aspire to, you'll be able to see where they come from. I will say that Sustaina, who we use in the example here, does do 100% Canadian recycled paper, although not, I don't think cover stock can be an issue. So that's one place to look if you haven't tried to have a printer order paper from Sustaina. I know that Friesens, for example, does stock it regularly. That's one of our go-to paper stocks. Okay.
Jen, I did put a link in the chat to the Canopy Planet Eco Paper database. I don't personally use that, and I'm just quickly looking at it when you asked that question. It does seem that you can click through to papers that are listed there, and it does tell you what city. It's just every kind of paper. It's not just book printing paper. So I'm not sure how useful it would be, but you could try that. So I put the link in the chat there. It's called the Eco Paper database from Canopy. Also a Canadian not-for-profit.
Thank you, EJ. Okay. This question I think is a really exciting one. Maybe Julie can answer it. Is how did New Society decrease its carbon footprint over the past number of years beyond paying attention to the metrics, of course?
I think, EJ, do you remember specific targets over those years?
We didn't start setting targets till we got to did our science-based targets. But what we did was look really closely at our print runs. Like once we identified paper, then we're like, okay, so just being really careful, and then starting looking at options like the hybrid print runs, printing a bit less, recycling a bit less. There was a lot of places we just tweaked, and to be fair, a lot of it was economic as well. So it's nice when you get a win-win like that. Yeah. Anything else, Julie? We certainly are careful with our business travel, but that's a small part of the carbon. But we certainly do things like you won't see us at sales conference in New York every year. You won't see us at Frankfurt every year. And those are hard decisions. It's a difficult decision to make each time, but sometimes we've decided to save the carbon and not go in person.
Any other questions, Jen?
There's no other questions queued up. I've seen some like hand raises flash, but to keep things simple, if you have a question, can you please put it in the Q&A, or if that's not available to you for some reason into the chat, we're happy to answer it.
I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So one thing we want you to take away from this is that Julie has, as I said, done an A+ job at using these tools and gathering data. And yet even she has sometimes been like, employee commuting is not worth it for us. We don't have the systems in place to track this yet, or we think it's going to be so marginal, it doesn't matter. And so it's okay to set those boundaries, of course, to yourself. You can also use sections of that spreadsheet, or tabs rather, independently. Maybe this year you just want to focus on travel. You could just focus on travel. Again, like you can just you can do that. So don't feel like you have to do everything perfectly. As we've tried to stress, like we've made this as precise as we can without driving us all to the brink of insanity by tracking every little detail. As always, it's, going to be a holistic decision that takes into consideration other factors. But I hope what you can see is that like they've put some pretty easy systems in place also to gather this data as it happens, to make it more efficient to gather this data. So that it doesn't have to be a thing that's like as painful as doing your taxes, like that. It can be something where you've entered your taxes or you've been preparing all along for your taxes, you're ready. So yes.
I do see a couple of questions in the chat that I don't think we answered. What sort of print run numbers count as POD, even if not using what would call a POD printer? So the type of machine you're printing on is the most important thing. So if it's a digital printing machine, then you would just count the actual numbers that you printed there, if that answers the question. Hopefully it does. If it's an offset print run, then you would count it as offset printing because the machines use different levels of energy. If I didn't answer it, please let me know. And also, can you save your progress and have others take over and complete sections? Definitely. It's an Excel spreadsheet. So you just rename it, save it, and you can open it up and carry on later on.
Any other questions as we're winding down? Thank you, Abigail. We love praise. It's been a very long journey. Extremely long.
I would just like to sum up and say that just begin, pick something, just get started. It's not so hard.
Yes. If nothing else, use that book tool, check out what the implications of some of the choices you routinely make and the things that you suspect might make a difference. Like, well, what if the trim size was different? What if we changed the ship split? What if we did this POD? What or digitally? What would the difference be? Just play around and see, and then let that be something that you can bring back to the organization and discuss, like whether it's a good idea to implement. The other thing I will say is that you may have noticed that this doesn't include ebooks. This doesn't include audiobooks or e-audiobooks. There is a tool out there. Andreas in Denmark, maybe EJ has his last name handy, has created one for digital books. So you could find that out. But again, we're looking at the biggest possible chunks. And for most of us, well, all of us, this is print books. So that's why the focus is there. So if you're like, but what about the ebook? Don't worry. Girl, don't worry. It's okay. Like if you want to calculate it by Andreas has got you, you can do it, but just to, there we go. EJ's put Andreas's full name in the chat. You can do that, but again, we've really focused, as much as this is like can be very detailed, we've focused on the biggest possible factors, like the biggest levers that you can pull in terms of carbon. Okay. I think that might be a wrap. Many thanks to EJ and to Julie, our fearless guide, who took us through this, and to all of you for attending, and to our generous hosts, Booknet, who brought far more technical acumen to this than we ever could have. So thank you. And this video will be posted on YouTube. You'll be able to watch it if you want to share around. As always, I can put the link back in where you can download the tools. As I mentioned, there's a small update coming down the pipe. So if you want to wait a week or so, you could get a more up-to-date one. But they're available here. As always, if you have questions, concerns, comments, feedback, please sustainability@ecwpress.com. It will get to us and we will chat.
Good luck, everyone. You got this.